there was something yesterday which I encourage you to notice. For instance, let's take this big project from Poland, where there is a community trying um, uh, to renew a very important area of the town. As you told us, there is a lot of interest from citizens, from everyone, in having back this space for the social and the business activity in the town. So everyone is excited, everyone sees how good can be having back this space for others, basically. Sorry, there's people still entering the meeting. But then in the end, when I asked, how can you support and finance all this, you will very often have the same situation. So you have to search money outside the community. You are dependent of money coming from somewhere else. And we feel that as a normal situation. No, we see that again and again and again. We have to go around and search for money, which is strange, because it's strange that the community in itself can't really provide the resources. And you will see this everywhere. So you're waiting for something coming from outside your system to do things that your system really wants and really think it's something important, it's something valuable for you, for the community. So there is a problem there, and this is not new. It's a problem that we see in our modern economy, and that's why at a certain point there was this idea to do something different with our monetary system, and to start in very different way, with very different mechanism, to detach the community from the general monetary system and the general economic system. Because there is a need to create a space where the local thing, the local, not only the local authority, but the community can operate with a margin that is not available in the general system. And that's why we have in the world so many, we have and we had so far in the world so many different experiments trying to do something that you can put aside the general economic and monetary system to create this space of mobility. You can study better the topic. It's a very big topic. There are so many different ways to do this, or at least to try to do this, and to explore different mechanisms. In this slide, you have a link, as we did in the past, to a very short article trying to make a list of the different possibilities that we explored so far. There are many different ways to categorize the different complementary currencies, and there's no the right one. I mean, there is a lot of overlap in between different methodologies. So don't worry too much about having a very, very precise definition of the different things. But basically, what you are trying to do is to create this space to operate and to rule the space with a different set of rules, because a different set of rules can create a condition that is not available in the system we live in all the time. Okay, so as a first step, I took this, is 13 minutes, it's very dense, and is a little technical. So I encourage you to focus on what it says. This is a general view of what it means to move into a different space, at what can be the results of living in a different space, and also gives us an idea on why we've been talking along the project of this problem of not thinking about the future in a proper way. We just think about the near future. Tomorrow, a couple of years, my mandate as a politician, and we don't think long term. And in this video, you will see that there are also mechanical reasons in the system that we don't consider normally, that brought our economy to work this way. This is Bernard Lietaer. It was a very important guy. It's the guy that created the mechanism to detach money from gold after Bretton Woods agreements, international agreements. That was a big step for humanity, because from that moment, everything about money was changing. We didn't pay much attention to that, but it was a big change. This was the guy behind the ECU, if you remember, if you follow the European process to get to the euro. The first step was this basket called ECU, and this was the guy behind the exchange rate from local currency, national currencies, to euro. So it was a very important mind behind many of the mechanisms that are regulating our systems. And at the same time was very deep involved in the creation of a completely different system. I had the pleasure to work with him, unfortunately for a very short time, because he died in 2019. Suddenly, without, I mean, it was okay, and one day, the day after, was gone, unfortunately. So we had to stop the activity that we were doing together at institutional level in Italy. And maybe for those of you that are coming to Italy, we can talk a little bit more about the activity we did together. So let's go with the video. I hope it will work nicely. And please focus on this little lecture.
Hello, my name is Bernard Lietaer. I am currently research fellow at the University of California at Berkeley and visiting professor at the Finance University in Moscow. My topic is the crisis, with a very peculiar angle to it. Why? What is common to all these crises? That's the first. And the second thing, what you as businesses can do something about it. If you expect to simply wait for the governments to solve the problem, or the central banks, be ready for the disappointment. Now, there are 3 key points. One, there's a structural cause that's common to all crises, all monetary and financial crises. The second one is there's a structural solution. Now, structural problems should be solved with structural solutions, otherwise you're going to repeat them. And 3, the example I would be giving of a solution is actually something that will help businesses to think long term, which I think is the key to sustainability. It's businesses who decide what the future will look like. And if they think short term, we will not get there. So the general plan is, I'll first deal with the structural cause, which is probably news to most people, and then what we do about the solutions. What's interesting is that the media always talks about the crisis as if it is the first one. And for us, of course, the 2007, 2008 one, which is the biggest on record since the 30s for at least, is what we're referring to. In fact, the IMF has inventoried 145 banking crashes, 204 monetary collapses, and 72 sovereign debt crises, like we have currently with Greece. So what's never talked about is what's common about them. Always talked about is what's different about them. But there is something in common. And that's where the key is. In the last 7 years, I've been working with a team in the United States on measuring sustainability with a single metric for any complex flow network. The research has been started on complex flow networks. And efficiency and resilience are actually both conditioned by structural variables, diversity and interconnectivity. You will have more efficiency when you reduce diversity, and you will have more resilience when you reduce the efficiency. So you have this balance going on all the time. Now, what's important is that this is independent of what is processed in the network. Biomass is how we measure what happens in a forest, in a natural ecosystem. Electrons in electrical distribution systems. Information in an immune system, or money in an economy. High diversity, here's an example, a rainforest. You have very huge diversity and relationships between all these different kinds of plants and animals is very dense. And if you take a squirrel, for example, this is a picture of a squirrel in Central Park, New York. They are very, very interconnected. They can eat anything, even cardboard, by the way. So they survive, they can adapt more flexibly. Compare this with, on the one side, a low diversity system, a monoculture. One match, one cigarette, one disease, and the whole thing is gone. And the panda, which is very, very nice animal, is in trouble because it eats only one type of bamboo. So the future of the panda is going where the future of the bamboo is. That is what we can see from natural ecosystems. Now, let's apply this to money systems. A complementary currency is something, a standardized unit, that can circulate in parallel to conventional money. Classical example is the miles that everybody has been using for 30 years, which is actually a currency issued by airlines. It doesn't have any particular other value except for loyalty toward the airline. But it is a currency that people have usually not even been aware that it is a currency. The example that I will provide as a diversity is called the Terra. It is a currency that is capable of operating on a global level. It's a standardized basket of the most important commodities and services involved in international trade. That includes, for example, a barrel of oil, 10 pounds of copper, 10 bushels of wheat, a tenth of an ounce of gold. You could have some services, carbon emissions, and half a dozen other things. That basket, the value of that basket is actually the value of the Terra. And the Terra would only be issued on the basis of an inventory of these things. So in other words, it's a fully backed currency. Now, that basket of even 6 commodities is 4 times less volatile than the major currencies in the world, including the dollar. That's the first advantage. The second one is, by definition, this is inflation resistant. Inflation is the value of a basket over time. And here what we're basically measuring is a global inflation. And the third point is it's fully backed. This currency, such a basket, could resist any shock to the global system. What's original to the system is that the storage cost would be paid by the bearer of that unit. So in other words, storage is actually not have to be paid by the corporations who are actually selling them anymore. What is the role of that demurrage? That's called demurrage, a negative interest rate, a parking fee on money. Well, to understand the implication is the best way is you look at a metaphor of how we invest and how interest or demurrage affects our perception of time. Let's assume that I have a very simple world where I have to invest in either a tree made out of pines or a tree made in oaks. And to make all the numbers very simple is that after 10 years, the pines will be worth $100, and after 100 years, the oaks would be worth $1,000. Now, the numbers are chosen, all this is adjusted for inflation, of course, which would mean that the value, the real value would be actually the same. I have 10 times the capacity to plant the pines, and at the end, I would have $1,000 inflation adjusted. That is the way it would look in real world. However, as soon as you introduce a currency, as soon as you introduce money, something else happens. Let's take the example of what happens with normal money when you have a currency with interest. That is, as all financial people know, the way one compares two projects is discounting the cash flow. And in the case of pines, the discounted cash flow is of $100 10 years from now is $61.39. If you have an an interest rate of 5%. The oak, however, is only worth $7.60. So when you're living in a world where the only currency you use is a currency with a positive interest rate, don't be surprised that people don't think long term. Now, what happens with demurrage? With a negative interest rate, a cost for keeping the money. Of course, you will not use that currency as a store of value. You will not have a savings account in that. That wouldn't make sense. But you could use it for everything else, including contracts, including trade. Now, what's the interest of having a demurrage charge currency? Well, let's apply the same principle. What happens to the pines on a demurrage environment? It's worth $167. And the oak suddenly is worth $168,000. In a society with that kind of currency, the long term becomes more important than the short term. The opposite of what we do today. Now, this sounds very strange to us because we haven't seen systems like that for about 600 years, 700 years in Europe. Need to wait for the Central Middle Ages to find the last applications of demurrage charge currencies. In Egypt, they used it for over 1,000 years, 1,600 years. So one can have systems like that that are in a modern form, and the Terra is the modern form of an old idea. The usefulness of this, first of all, it resolves the conflict between shareholder value and society. Today, shareholders are pushing to short-term results, and the entire system is geared up to do that. That is not what's going to get us to a survivable world. With the solution that we're proposing, it actually makes it possible to resolve that conflict, because with a Terra currency, you can compare the future with the present, and projects with long-term benefit will get encouraged, or projects with a huge cost in the long-term future get completely eliminated from the picture. There's a second benefit from a business angle. The Terra would function counter-cyclically. That means that if the business cycle is a boom, you will have a lot less terrors because everybody uses the commodities that are necessary for creating terrors. The first sign of a recession is actually an excess of inventory and excess of raw materials. And the businesses would then automatically tend to sell the excess inventory to the Terra Alliance that actually would pay them in terras, because it's also a time period when you would have sort of cash flow. That creates less economic instability, which is good for everybody. To conclude, we have a choice. If we try to resolve all the problems of the 21st century with the old model, with the idea of one currency per country of the same type, we're going to get in trouble, like this poor donkey is. I think it's time to embrace a new way of thinking in the monetary domain. The last time I looked, this planet is the only one in the neighborhood where it's nice to live. I think we should do something about that.
Okay, so this is an important message because you don't need to understand all the numbers the correct way. The central concept is the monetary system is there and is having a huge impact on what we can and what we can't do, the way it is organized today. But we have, even if it's difficult, we have spaces that we need to explore if we want to exit the, call it, normality that we live in. And this is not theory. If we go back for a moment, the VER system, for instance, in Switzerland, it's a very, very old complementary currency, and it's working fine, and it's still working fine. The Sardex in Italy, in Sardinia, was a big revolution, and it's working fine in creating a completely new space for the local economy that was very, very depressed. So this is something that we can really do, and this is something that we should put in our agenda. So let's go. Okay. Let's go back to our first discussion on this very simple scheme from Peter Senge. Not all of you were in the meetings where we explored and we used this scheme, but it's very, very simple. When we have a problem, there are basically two ways to face the problem, and we normally go as a first reaction to the symptomatic solution. So we try to do something quickly to reduce the effects of the problem that we are facing. So we can react quickly and we can implement the solution quickly. And we hope the problem can be solved. But in a society where thinking in a short-term way, this is often enough. No, we never really go to face the radical solution, the radical nature of the problem, because doing that, it takes more time, because we need to do a deep analysis of the problem to really understand what's happening, and very often in a very complex system like the one we are living in, this really takes time, takes energy, takes money. And only when we get to the root of the problem, we can start implementing a real solution to the problem. And this is as important as the other cycle, because very often we need both. The normal example is if you have an headache, you may take a pill to relieve the pain at the moment, which is important because otherwise you will feel pain all the time. But then you probably want to know why you had the headache and go to the doctor and to understand better what's happening to you, and if the headache is a problem, if it was something happening once and never again, and so on. So this is the same situation. When we face poverty, when we face people excluded by the system because the money are not enough, or even when we see very interesting projects not finding the resources to be completed, as we saw yesterday, for instance, no, something so interesting, so right, I would say with a single word, not so right for the community, and then I can't do it, no, because I don't have the money, because I don't have the energy, because I don't have the people, I can't hire the right people to do the project. Very often we keep circling in the symptomatic space. So let's get some money from Europe, let's try somebody to give. But the radical problem is why we don't have the money to do things that we really value. Why the community has this state of poverty and we can't do what we really want to do. And this is something we really we explore very rarely. So what Bernard was saying is, yes, this is one of the tools we can use. Complementary currency can be a way to create a space to move into a different set of rules. And what we know so far, since we had so many thousands, literally thousands of different experiments around the world, so we have understood enough about this kind of activities. What we know is that using a complementary currency, a form of complementary currency, and choosing the right form, first of all, we can mitigate extractive economy. Because what we know now is that a lot of the value that the local community creates nowadays is going away from the community and never come back. Okay, so we generate 100 as a value as a community, but most of this 100 is not staying there to fulfill our needs, is going somewhere else, not coming back to us. And this is an effect that is increasing every year. So a lot of what we create as a value goes away. And having something that is connected to the value and that stays in the community is a way to reduce this extraction. I will give you a number at the end of this meeting today to make this very practical in an experiment done in a real community with real number of that community. So first effect we can search, we can aim is to reduce the amount of value going away from the community and keeping the value circulating in the community. And this is a factor of resilience, as Bernard was saying. So if we have more resources that we can use the way we need, of course, we can react to violent fluctuation of the general economy. We are not talking to exclude the general economy. We are talking to have tools to react to what happened outside our area of power, we can say, you know. When inflation gets very hard, what we can do at local level, what you can do as a municipality, what you can do as a local business, very little normally, because you don't have anything on, you don't have a switch or something that you can regulate for that. you just you get caught in the storm, you know, without very little margin to avoid the consequences. So having something which is under your control is a new element that gives you at least a little bit of power. And as Bernard was saying, when the general economy goes down, you don't go down so quickly because you have something. And this is proved. So for instance, De Veer in Switzerland was one of the observed experiment, because as a long story, and it's very clear, is really helping the local businesses when the general economy is going down. It gets value and it sustains the local economy. Then what else? You can reduce the still people entering. You can induce lifestyle changes and sustain virtuous activities. One of the problems that we have in this transition moment, where we know we should change many things, is that it's difficult to convince people to change their habits, particularly if you can't really give to them something as a value of exchange in changing, or you can't really sustain the changes that are very often are expensive. Instead, having a margin, a piece of economy under your control, you can decide to sustain, for instance, ecosystemic services. No, you are preserving a little piece of wood. It doesn't give you an income because there's no way to transform those trees living, alive, sustaining biodiversity into an income. Then, if I have a piece of economy under my control as local community, I can give you a reward to you for sustaining this little piece of wood, for using bicycle instead of taking the car, or to install renewable energy or whatever. What else? We thought, again, you can contrast inflection and close gaps for new way of sustaining poverty, basically, and inclusion. And this is even more interesting. Since the creation of this value is under your control, you can try to move into a different paradigm. Our paradigm is completely based on scarcity. So you have to do this and that to get enough money to live in this society. And the paradigm is, yeah, it's difficult to get what you need. What if you can change this thing, as Bernard was saying, starting a system where the starting point is having enough? So changing our starting point, which is today, if I don't do what the system asks, I'm not having enough to live a decent life. I will end up on the pavement or under a bridge. What if we could start, everyone could start from having enough, not being rich, but having enough. And then from there, start building something more. This is a big change, and this was experimented with the many experiments of basic universal income, call it the way you prefer. And it seems in this experiment extremely interesting, because it really creates a different kind of society as a consequence. So maybe one day we will all have a global basic income by right, I don't know. Also because, you know, there is artificial intelligence getting in our system. A lot of jobs are maybe become obsolete and so on. So, but what if we could start this kind of process at local level? Is that possible? Is that something we are exploring? And in the end, another very important thing, when we talk about inclusion, integration, we have to think that still in our society, this is different from country to country, of course, but still in our society, there is a lot of human positions that are not accepted. So for them, it's difficult to find a job. It's difficult to find a very qualified job because, for instance, in some countries, if I'm a transgender, for instance, it will be very difficult to get to some position in society because there is an exclusion mechanism going on. And then poverty is a consequence of the fact that I'm excluded by some part of the system. And again, if I have the possibility to manage locally a certain amount of value, I can sustain those positions. I can support integration of different kind of people in society. So we have a number of possibilities here that are nice to explore. And I will ask you, how many of you, how many in your local community are exploring this position? Because this is the first problem. At least we should start to see the possibility, because until we get there, we have this idea in mind, we will never go into trying to do it, okay? At the same time, what we know is that going this way can be risky because we have a very, very low level of culture. We are very ignorant. We don't have in our curricula very often a story of understanding all these different mechanisms, how the money works, how the money is created, how the general system works, how the local system can work. So very often you will see this kind of experiment started with a lack of clarity on the purpose. There is a huge confusion in this experiment that the local level is going to do. And this brings ourselves into trouble in the time. So many of these projects die very soon. They are not sustainable and all. So going back to the Keynesian scheme that we explored during the project, we have to remember that we are in a complex space. So we need to try to have clarity, the best possible way, knowing that complex systems are very difficult. So we have to move very carefully and knowing that you will proceed by trial and error doing this kind of model. So being ready to change. There was a lot of this in the talks yesterday, and it was very nice to know that some of the projects were from the start created with this idea that we will try and maybe we will discover that this is not the right way and we will be ready to change. So the other huge giant problem is the problem of the governance of the process, because this way of the community to have in their hands a big power, the power of managing the value that community creates, brings a big responsibility, and you really need a way to share the governance of this kind of processes. Because otherwise you get yourself in a very dangerous position, particularly if you leave the operation in solely in the hand of politicians or in the hand of the market, because you will very quickly go back to the initial situation, and all your activity into this space will be basically destroyed by going back to old processes. Polarization, market, so business, how can I get money from these activities, and so on. And we have a lot of examples of this kind around the world. Then third, problem, sustainability. If you start something like this, you have to be ready to keep the process going for a long time. It must be sustainable, because you have to keep in place the governance, you have to keep in place everything that you technically need to sustain the project. So before you start, you have to create a sustainability plan of the project, and we see failing many of this process on this point. A very nice start, a very enthusiastic community join the project, but then the project dying because no one is really in the position to do all you need to do to keep the mechanism going. Last element, legislation. So every country has a different attitude toward this kind of activities. So before starting, you really need to go for a very deep and careful exploration of everything that goes around the legal implication, because you are touching something that has implication in taxation, local taxation, national taxation, and you are interacting with the business of the banks, you are interacting with businesses that are moving into a similar space, because in the end, when the problem is to buy food, of course, there's people selling food, so you need to, there is an interaction with the people producing food or producing any other goods or providing any other service. So a very deep legal analysis is very important. Otherwise, you have the risk to carry your local community into a big trouble. And the problem is, once you fail in something like this, you probably close the door forever. It will be very difficult to start again after a big failure of this kind. So going back to lack of purpose, since from the beginning, as Magda was saying yesterday, you must try to be very clear that this is an experiment, this is something that we can change along the way, and so on.